Morning all. Now, I said when I started as opposition leader, we were going to listen, stand by our values, fix our policies and work bloody hard for the Australian people. So it's good to be in Parliament doing exactly that. I also said that when the government comes up with a good idea, we'll be constructive, but we'll be critical where we need to be. When they come up with a bad idea, we won't hesitate to call that out. So today our party room agreed to give swift passage to a number of bills, and I want to talk about a couple of those, and John O'Doniam and Dan Tehan are going to pick up additional comments in their respective areas. But on childcare, I wrote to the Prime Minister several weeks ago following the hideous revelations in childcare centres around the country and the sheer disgust and horror that was the reaction of every single parent and indeed parliamentarian and community member. This needs to be sorted. It's not quite yet, but what we have agreed to is to facilitate, as I said, swift passage of legislation. John O'Doniam has worked constructively and well with the government and will have more to say about how we will continue to hold them to account in this important area. Now, on the matter of the student debt bill, we will not oppose the government's proposal. And I want to say this to students today. Remember this moment, because Anthony Albanese says life will be easier under him, costs will come down, everything will get cheaper. Remember this moment, because when I've spoken to young people across the country, they've talked about escalating costs in rent, in electricity, in groceries, in everything a student needs to spend money on. It's been really tough. And I want to highlight that underpinning this student debt relief bill has been a massive cost of living crisis for Australia's students. So we will be holding them to account on that without any shadow of a doubt. But today we agreed to not oppose the bill as it makes its way through the Parliament. We do care about students who are struggling with the cost of living. And I said we'd be positive where we can be and critical where we need to be. And Dan Tehan will talk in a moment about the government's continuing train wreck of an energy policy and revelations today about further lack of transparency, further lack of trust from us, and I'm sure from the Australian people, more and more questions about what is this going to cost. So I'll hand over to Jono, who'll make some remarks, and then over to Dan.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. And it is important that we do get on with the job we're elected to do, as Susan said. And in her letter to Anthony Albanese, we committed as an opposition to be constructive around this incredibly important issue of protecting some of the most vulnerable in our community, children in childcare centres. After what happened in Victoria, and sadly, as has happened in other parts of the country for quite some time, we don't have a day to waste, and every measure needs to be put in place to protect young people in childcare centres. We owe it to them, we owe it to their families that we have let down collectively. This is not a Labor problem, this is not a Liberal problem, this is not a this government problem, it is not purely a Commonwealth government problem. It is something that we all, as community leaders, need to bear responsibility for and take, as I said before, every step to ensure never happens again. And so, as Susan has said, we've agreed to and committed to work constructively with the government on the legislation that they have brought forward, and that's what we agreed in our party room today to do. But I do hasten to add that the measures contained in this legislation only go so far in dealing with what is a national crisis and needs a much greater response. The laws we're dealing with, and I do want to pay tribute to Jason Clare, who has worked with us as any minister who takes his job seriously would. He's provided us briefings along the way and been very constructive. These laws only deal with the administration of the childcare payments to centres that aren't meeting the standards. There is so much more that needs to be done to protect children in childcare centres, and a lot of that is in the domain of state and territory governments. But it is the job of the Commonwealth, as the leader of governments across this country, to bring state and territory ministers together to work on all of the rest of the measures needed to protect children in childcare centres, to give parents the certainty they need, and to prevent what we've seen happen in centres past from ever happening again. So we're calling on the government, and again extending that invitation to work on this bipartisanly, to act with haste, to have ministers bring together the reforms needed, the laws that need to change, the regulations that need to be introduced, to improve our broken childcare system, to protect young. We cannot just say it's a matter for state and territory governments. You've got the opposition wanting to join with the government here in Canberra to give them every bit of confidence and every power to ensure their state and territory counterparts do what's right. We want them to be working on things like improving a national approach to working with children checks, something that in 2025 baffles me is not the case, to dealing with the ability for childcare workers to have personal mobile devices in centres. We know that that's a problem that needs dealing with given what happened in Victoria, and a national register of childcare workers. We do it for teachers, why not for childcare workers? So there's a range of measures there that need to be dealt with, and again, our message is to the government is to please hurry up. Parents need it, children need it, we owe it to them. This is not a blame game. Let's get on and fix the mess, and we will stand with you in doing so.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Jono. One of the deep concerns we've always had is when you get a large majority government, that hubris will creep in, that you will see a lack of transparency. You will see them not wanting to be held to account. And sadly, that's what we're seeing. And you all know it because you've sat in question time and seen the Prime Minister reduce the number of questions down from 7 now to 6. Have a look at what's happening with freedom of information requests. The government is not dealing with FOIs. As a matter of fact, it's taking months upon months upon months for any information to be released to the media and to be released to the opposition. And sadly, we're seeing that lack of transparency continue today. We've seen the CSIRO release their Gen Cost data. And if you go to page 23 of that Gen Cost report, this is what it says. A request raised across several consultation cycles is for more detail and background information on the system modelling carried out to estimate variable renewable integration costs. The modelling tool used to carry out these calculations is not suitable for general release. Why? This is our leading scientific organisation, and it won't release the modelling on what these costs they're putting forward. And it says, and it goes on to say, that they'll do more work. Well, surely when it comes to our electricity grid, the government should have already done that work, especially when they made a commitment to the Australian people to reduce their power bills by $275 by the end of this year. Nothing in this report goes to that fact. As a matter of fact, all we see now is our leading scientific organisations saying that they can't release that modelling. Well, I think the government needs to explain why, and are they behind that? And the second thing we've seen today is that the Minister Bowen, has said that the capacity investment scheme is going to increase by 25%. Yet there is no detail around the cost of that increase by 25%. That is billions more dollars being spent on behalf of the Australian taxpayer, and he will not detail that. And once again, there is a very valid reason as to why we need to know how much he is spending, because all this money was meant to reduce your power bill and the power bills of all Australians by $275 by the end of this year. Yet he will not release those details. This lack of transparency, this hubris that we're already starting to see from this government needs to be called out. It needs to be called out by us, and we'll do that, but it's also beholden on you on behalf of all Australians to do the same. Thank you.
Questions? Anna?
Thank you. Susan Ley, do you believe there is starvation in Gaza?
I've been incredibly distressed by the images that I've seen, incredibly distressed, as has everyone around the world. I'm pleased that aid is now starting to flow into Gaza and that Israel has changed some of those aid channel flows in order to achieve that. But I want to make this very important point because everyone wants the war to end. The war could end tomorrow if Hamas, the terrorist organisation that is in charge in Gaza, releases the hostages that have been kept since October the 7th, 2023 and surrendered. The war could end tomorrow. And it's vital that we know that these underpinnings of the circumstances that we now see horrendous situations ensuing from can all be resolved by Hamas, who have been keeping hostages in tunnels in Gaza since October the 7th.
But you haven't answered my question. Do you believe that there's
Can I just move
starvation
on?
in Gaza? Sorry, you've been asked twice now.
I've said I'm very
But
distressed by the images that I've seen.
do you believe that that's evidence of starvation?
It's a complex situation on the ground, like everyone. I'm very distressed by the images I've seen. I'm pleased to see that aid is flowing further and better into Gaza, and I really encourage everyone who sees this situation for the reality it is to remind others that Hamas, in control of the hostages, could end the war tomorrow.
Ms Lee, the Prime Minister said this morning that it was beyond comprehension for Israel to assert that there was no starvation in Gaza. Your reaction to that comment, please?
Well, I've just answered that.
But
Of
beyond
course,
comprehension?
we're distressed by the images we see. There is no question. And we all want to see aid flow into Gaza, and we all want the war to end, and we all want the suffering to cease.
Ms. Lee,
Phil?
Yeah, just on that, could I ask a two-part question? Do you think the Israelis would help their cause if they let Western journalists into Gaza, so their claims or otherwise could be independently verified? And could I also ask you for comments on Donald Trump's latest utterings on trade and talking about a minimum 15 to 20% tariff, and what your view is on that?
In terms of access to a war zone, that's complex. It's very easy to make statements from afar, but there are complexities about travel and access in a war zone, and it's important that we remember that and come back to my earlier statements. With respect to Donald Trump, I just regret the way that the government seems to be shrugging its shoulders as if there is nothing they can do to address the tariff situation. It is not good enough that all these months after Donald Trump became president, the vital meeting between Anthony Albanese and the president has not taken place. And I just see that Anthony Albanese appears to be running up the white flag. And we have a lot of questions that we're raising about whether biosecurity for Australian beef has been traded off somehow for access to a discussion about tariffs. Meanwhile, the most important thing, the personal relationship between two leaders that needs to exist now, not later. And we've got a Prime Minister who is a complete bystander in all of this.
Ms. Lee, you say you've been distressed by the images you've been seeing out of Gaza. Do you acknowledge that Israel has played a role in allowing the situation to get to where it is, that we're seeing such distressing images?
I have been distressed, and I don't mind saying that over and over again, but I still make the same points that I have before. It's very complex on the ground. It's not something that we can make judgments about every move that is made. There are reports of Hamas interrupting the flow of aid and carrying on its atrocious activities at this time. Now, if we want the war to end, and we all do, we know the simplest, quickest way is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. Just go to Sarah.
If I could just ask, Simon Steele, the UN climate chief, is in town. He's talked about the high grocery prices Australians are seeing today will look like a picnic down the track if we don't set ambitious 2035 targets. He says fruit and veg will be a once-a-year treat. I would like to ask your view on that language, and Mr Tien, if I could as well. I think the internal working group for the climate change net zero target, it met last week.
It did, yes.
So I would really like to get your sense on how that went in terms of any kind of agreement. If I could start with you, Ms Lee.
Well, I've read those remarks, and I refer you to what Dan Tien said about cost. And we are holding this government to account for its energy policy and the changes to the capacity mechanism, the acknowledgement, almost no longer tacit, that it is going to be impossible to reach 82% renewables by 2030, and the scrambling for alternate sources of reliable power like gas just shows how badly the government has messed this up. But what our job is, as members of the opposition, is to hold them to account when it comes to the cost for Australians. Because I couldn't visit a manufacturing factory floor during the last 3 years and not hear a story of an energy crisis, closing down a business, sending it offshore, removing workers, and actually causing great pain in that community and that family. So you can't have an energy policy that this government has announced that is all about renewables only and expect it not to cost much, much more. And more importantly, not actually acknowledge the real answers that Australians deserve, which is how much will that cost increase?
Cost in jobs, cost to households, cost to industries. These are all the things that we need to get information from this government. And we had a very, very constructive meeting, our first meeting of our Energy and Emissions Reduction Committee last week. And the key focus between now and Christmas is going to be on gas. The government is undertaking a review on gas. As we know, New South Wales, Victoria, they are very, very concerned that if they can't get more gas onto the market in the coming couple of years, then we're likely to see huge pressure put on our energy grid. So that's going to be the key focus between now and Christmas as we continue to work through the detail of what our alternative energy policy and emissions reduction policy will be. And can I say, I think, and I know Sussan does and my coalition colleagues think, it's incredibly important that we have an alternative to put to the Australian people. And that is what we are going to work on over the next 9 to 12 months, because we have to be able to put an alternative to what is becoming more and more like a train wreck that we're seeing under Chris Bowen.
What do you say to those, including people in your party, who say that you won't be seen as a credible party of government unless you do express and have support for net zero?
I would say that we have about 2 years and 9 months to the next election. We have the time to get energy policy right. We need to reflect on the result that we had on May the 3rd, listen to the Australian people, and develop energy policy with two fundamental principles: playing our part in reducing emissions in a transparent and responsible way, and assuring that we have a stable, reliable grid that provides affordable energy for households and businesses. Now, Dan Tien's just described the initial work of the Energy Working Group, and the first thing that group is doing is holding the government to account, because remember that we are not in government. We don't hold the levers that can control people's power bills. But my goodness, we see they're going up $275. Another list of broken promises relating to energy, including the proportion of renewables, and real acknowledgement today that their energy policy isn't working. So first and foremost, we will hold them to account. Katina.
Just following up on your response about the tariffs, I mean, Donald Trump has said for months the baseline will be 10%, and then last week he said 10 to 15, and overnight he said 15 to 20. I mean, how do you deal with a foreign leader who just seems to be making it up as he goes along?
By sitting in the room with him and talking to him, by recognising...
With leaders who haven't met with him, why would this...
At least 20 world leaders have. And the important thing is, in this increasingly digital, interconnected world, the face-to-face meeting matters, and it makes a difference. And it's the way the President does business, and it's something Anthony Albanese does not seem to be stepping up to do. And the questions that you're asking me, I really think, with respect, you need to ask the Prime Minister, and I'm sure you will. What is he doing about getting a meeting? What is his plan? How much longer do we have to have a situation where we haven't had that face-to-face meeting? And the questions that are developing from that are very concerning, because we've raised the issue of biosecurity with respect to beef. And it does seem very coincidental that that issue has just turned up this week. So the government has real questions to ask. I hope they're not trading away our precious biosecurity for some sort of access to a conversation about tariffs. That conversation should have started long ago.
I'm sorry, can I just ask, yesterday, did you or your office issue any directive or have any conversations with senators about not attending the vote for net zero?
We're regularly in touch with senators and we're regularly in touch with members via the whip, via the managers of both opposition business in the House and the Senate. The gentleman in front of you actually just had the question. Yes.
Matt Canavan said this morning that it's worth having the fight over energy policy now because, in his words, the coalition is irrelevant. You said earlier you've got 2 years and 9 months until the next election. So do you agree with him that the coalition is irrelevant right now?
The coalition will develop energy policy without doubt. So I make that first point. The second point I want to make is that our job is to be a strong, responsible opposition that holds this government to account with its train wreck of an energy policy and all the other mistakes that it is starting to make. That's the job of opposition. That's what everyone in this country, whether you voted for us or you didn't, would expect of us.
Have you met with anyone from the Israel embassy in the last sort of 24 hours, and is that influencing your comments today?
I have conversations with the Jewish community across Australia all the time. My comments are not influenced by my last meeting, but you do raise a good point on the domestic implications of what happens overseas. And I am concerned, as are many in my party room, about the rising tide of anti-Semitism in this country, and I felt that when I visited the synagogue in East Melbourne just a few weeks ago. And to listen to those personal stories and to hear of children who go to childcare behind big locked gates with armed guards. In modern Australia, it's not something I think the average family would accept or understand. And when I hear members of our Jewish community feeling and saying that they don't feel welcome in this country because of so much that they're seeing around them, that is directed against them and is purely anti-Semitism. I know there is more work to do, and this Prime Minister needs to pay close attention to the recommendations of his own envoy. Instead of just accepting the report, actually start to implement some of those recommendations.
Perhaps for Mr Tain as well, on emissions reduction policy, what are the alternatives? You had a meeting last week. Were there any put forward in terms of, if there's opposition to net zero by 2050?
There's lots of alternatives, and that's what we're going to explore. And as I've said, the first thing we're going to look at is gas. And so we can bring more gas onto the system. We need to bring more gas onto the system, but also we need to explore carbon capture and storage. And I'd be happy to invite you down to my electorate where we have world-leading research taking place on carbon capture and storage. And yet this government, because of its ideological approach, is not funding that research to the level that it needs to be so that we have an alternative which would allow us to offset the emissions of bringing more gas on board. So that's one clear example, and I'm more than happy, come down to my electorate.
Goal, though, that obviously the long-term goal right now is net zero by 2050. Is there an alternative to that long-term goal? Is it a smaller amount of emissions reductions than what's currently been agreed to?
So we're working through a process. As you would know, if you've looked into our energy system, if you've looked into what you need to do to get to net zero, this is a very complicated issue. Just to give you basic understanding, at the moment we're dealing with the electricity sector. Now that's the most easy to abate sector, and that is where the government's focus is. They haven't started on the industrial sector. They haven't started on the land transport sector. They haven't started on the agriculture sector. Where's all the technology and the investment that we need in those sectors? These are all the things that we've got to work through. This is not something that you just solve by simply saying something. You actually have to demonstrate that you've got a full understanding of what is required and, importantly, know the cost of what is required, because at the moment the cost is being hidden by this government. You know, and you know, we will continue to hold the government to account on this. It's Reputech modelling, which they based that $275 reduction to your power bill on. Just during the last election campaign, they said that that is now not worth the paper it's written on. Now, have you seen the government come out and say, well, we got it wrong, we now have to go back to the drawing board, and to the Australian people, we apologise. We promised you $275 off your power bill by the end of the year. Our modelling was flawed, we got that wrong, so everything we told you over the last 3 years actually wasn't true. They're the sorts of things that if you don't get this right, that it leads to. Now, can I tell you, no, and I say this very seriously, I don't want to lie to the Australian people. I don't want to say to them, this is what is going to happen, and then find the exact opposite going to happen. I don't want to have the leading scientific organisation in this country saying that it won't be fully transparent with the modelling that it's using to say to the Australian people, this is what's going to happen. I mean, this is fundamentally flawed. It's ideologically driven. We heard today New South Wales saying that their capacity investment scheme, they are going to use gas because they understand that their grid is in serious trouble, and by 27, 28, they need more gas into their market. Now, are you hearing this from Chris Bowen? Is he going to add gas to the capacity investment scheme? No. He is saying he's going to introduce the capacity investment scheme by 25%, and he's not going to be transparent with the Australian people as to how much that costs. That is why we will take our time, we will get it right. I've given you one example, as I've said. Come down to my electorate, a key thing that we could use to reduce emissions is not being properly funded by this government.
Can we maybe just move on, because we've got a few more questions before we end. David Spears.
Can I just ask, do you still support the principle of recognising a Palestinian state?
When there is peace, our policy is a two-state solution. But first, there has to be peace, and we shouldn't get ahead of a process that is not present at the moment. And unfortunately, with Hamas in charge, there is no partner for peace. And until that situation resolves, only then can we take those important next steps.
To follow that up, what more would you like to see the federal government now do to try and alleviate the suffering of people in Palestine? Should the government be committing to more aid? Should we be talking about the rebuilding of Gaza, building infrastructure and so forth?
The Australian government should make it very clear that they know that the war could end tomorrow if Hamas surrendered and released the hostages.
Last question, guys.
Just back on tariffs, do you believe that Donald Trump is wrong to talk about 15 to 20% on a country like Australia, regardless of what this government is or isn't doing? Do you believe that Donald Trump is wrong to make this suggestion?
I don't comment on any other world leader and their domestic or international policy. What I comment on is our national interest in response to that. And it's very clear that the impact we can have is the conversation that allows the real reassurance that I know Australians want about tariffs, about AUKUS, about the strength of the relationship between our most important ally. And without a personal relationship, without a personal conversation, that's not happened. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.